Today's guest is from New Orleans in the US. She's originally from Rhode Island near New York. She converted to Islam in 2003. That was 17 years ago. She's a wife and a mother, and also an English teacher and a property manager.
Of course, having been introduced to Islam many years before and kind of knowing the history and what it takes to become a Muslim, because I'd been researching it for years. The Shahada just sprang from my lips at that point. There was like a warm feeling that came over me, and the recitation of the Quran in particular at this point, for some reason, like I would call it piercing your heart. It pierced my heart, and I couldn't deny it anymore. I had to be a Muslim. That's what I believed, and that's what was in my heart. So, alhamdulillah, that's actually when I took the Shahada. When I came back, I told my mother, and of course, it was another blow. She did cry. I remember her crying when I told her that I was a Muslim now, and this is what I believed, and this is what I was pursuing for my spiritual life. I mean, alhamdulillah, I've heard worse stories, parents disowning children and not wanting to speak to them. My mom wasn't like that. She was genuinely hurt, I think, and still is to this day, because she feels like I can't get into heaven the way that I'm going about my spiritual life. We got through it though, alhamdulillah. She accepted it over time, and she knew I'm grown and this is the way that it was going to be, because that's just who I am. Once I believe something, that's it. It really takes a lot and a lot of facts and science and all of that good stuff to convince me otherwise.
Welcome to the show, Christen.
Thank you. Thank you for having me.
Okay, you're very welcome. How are you today?
Alhamdulillah, very well.
Okay, Christen, so tell us a little bit about yourself now. I gave you an introduction, but is there anything you can add to it about yourself that you want to share with the audience?
Well, you basically hit the nail on the head. I am a mother of 4, so of course that keeps me very busy, especially with COVID-19 out there. So we're all stuck at home, and 3 out of my 4, are vying for the internet and trying to fulfill their school obligations. So that's fun day to day. And I'm reworking a memoir, as I had mentioned, about my journey from Christianity to Islam, that inshallah we can get published and out here in about a year. That's my goal, at least. And I'm looking forward to Ramadan this year, as it always provides opportunities for spiritual growth and knowledge and all of those great things.
Okay, and you've been a Muslim now for a long time, since 2003. Can you tell us what your life was like before you accepted Islam?
Yeah, so briefly, my mom growing up was the super religious one. So, it was church every Sunday and Sunday school, and she is to this day still very religious. She went to an Assemblies of God church, which is kind of like Pentecostal Christianity. And so I grew up with her basically leading my spiritual teaching. My father was off and on with his beliefs, and I would describe him more as agnostic than anything else, because I think we're built with, and what Islam tells us is like your inner religion. So you're always drawn to something bigger than yourself. But he could never really, for whatever reason, stick with church, or he had a lot of demons he was fighting. through his whole life. So, when I began to mature in intellect and also emotionally and all of that good stuff, my parents' relationship kind of devolved. They were divorced and it was a little bit volatile for a while. And I started questioning things like, you know, how does God have a son, like a literal son? How would God come to earth when this hasn't happened in, the Old Testament and with any of the other previous prophets, peace be upon them. And then I couldn't find answers, you know, when I would ask questions like, well, isn't Adam considered a son of God? Isn't Abraham considered a son of God? They'd say yes, but Jesus is the actual son of God, and he had to be sent to be a sacrifice for us because we're all sinners by nature, which also didn't sit right with me. So there were a lot of concepts in Christianity that just didn't fit with what I saw in the world, with my soul, with my nature. So at the age of maybe 13 or 14, told my mother, I love you and I don't want to disappoint you and all this stuff, but I don't believe this and I can't keep going to church. And at that point, of course, it broke her heart. And she still encouraged me. I am very thankful for her, alhamdulillah, because she did raise me with a moral compass. I feel like she gave me a good foundation to kind of navigate the pitfalls of society. So I really never got into drinking heavy or, going to clubs or drugs or, I don't know, crazy things. I think the outlets that I had were maybe shopping with friends or going to the movies or, having like Hollywood crushes or something like that. Like it wasn't the really hardcore stuff that a lot of American teenagers go through. And I'm very thankful for that. But yeah, so I grew up in all of that. And my father was always kind of in and out of my life and in the background with the idea that, maybe Christianity is not correct. So I believe
Can
in
I just stop
God.
you there? You
Sure.
mentioned that at the age of 13, you told your mother that the church was no good for you. Can you tell us a little bit more about that? How she reacted and your emotions at the time. Was it a big thing or just some passing idea?
No, it was a huge thing. Like I said, my mother's ultimate religious. So for her, me rejecting the idea that Christ is the Son of God, for her, that's the crux. So if you don't believe in this and you don't profess this, you can't get to heaven, no matter what you do, your good deeds, your beliefs, your nature as a person. So yes, she was very devastated, and as a mother, you're always trying to do your best for your children. And as a mother now, I can appreciate how devastating that must have been for her, because I would be devastated myself if one of my children turned away from Islam. So
And how did you deal with this emotion that your mother was not happy with it?
by the grace of God, I suppose. I mean, of course, I hate making my mother upset. I think most people, this is the case. Uh, but also, I was a teenager. So I think it was kind of my hormonal, emotional level that saved me from really being devastated back. I kind of was like, well, that's what it is. And, I'm not trying to hurt you, but I can't hurt myself in the process of believing things or professing to believe things that I just don't. So,
Okay, and so you can continue now with your story after the age of 13.
yep. So like I said, my home life wasn't that great in high school. And alhamdulillah, Allah always puts things in our path or people in our path to kind of lead us back. So in about not halfway through ninth grade, maybe the beginning of ninth grade, I met my best friend. She happened to be a Pakistani Muslim. Um, and we were basically inseparable from high school till I went to graduate school at McGill. And her family basically adopted me at a time when, again, my home life was pretty crazy. I'm not being like, what's the word I'm looking for? I'm being literal. Like, I slept over her house probably the majority of my high school career, which was like 4 years. And her parents were just so accepting and supportive, and they were never very pushy about Islam. Like, I knew they were Muslims, and it kind of made me a little curious. And every now and then, I think it was the summer of my senior year, I took, or they gave me a Quran from their house, and I read it because I was just curious by their manners and their actions and their generosity. So I wanted to see what it was that these people were believing, because, as I said, I left Christianity and I believed in God, but I didn't know, what the road to God was, or what that looked like. So I read the Quran from cover to cover, and when I finished, I put it down, and in my mind, I had read something beyond human comprehension, something that couldn't have been produced by a human themselves. It gave me like a clarity that I never found reading the Bible. Every time I tried to read the Bible, I would sit down for an hour or two and come out with a huge headache. After reading the Quran, it just felt like my mind was clear. So at that point, that was a piece that had been placed in my heart. I wasn't ready to convert at that point, but it kind of put like an ember in my brain, So that was really the setup for my journey.
How many years was that after you first met your friend?
So that was 3 years after. I met her in ninth grade, and that was 12th grade. So that was 3 years. And then we graduated. So we were inseparable. We graduated. We decided to go to the same college together. And when I entered college, I was like most college students. I didn't know what I wanted to do. I kind of had ideas about what I was good at. And eventually I settled on anthropology and history, which, everyone I met was like, how are you going to make money? And I don't know, money has never been a driving force in my life. Still isn't to this day. If I believe in something, or if I see merit in something that's going to make me grow as a person, money has never been a factor. So I just had this feeling that this was my path, and so I followed it. So a lot of my courses looked like Islamic studies, or I was searching, in retrospect, I was searching for the beginnings of human history. I wanted to know how we evolved, why we do things the way we do, how culture works, and influences our thought processes and our societies, and all the big questions. But ultimately, I was searching for, why we all seem to gravitate towards a higher power, and why that translates into so many different belief systems. So I spent my undergrad in that. And then I had a really amazing Islamic studies teacher who had gone to McGill. in Canada. And he pulled me aside one day, and me and my best friend, and he suggested that we apply to the Islamic Studies program. And oh, sorry, I have to back up. So actually, my junior year in college, in undergrad, I decided to apply for a grant to be able to go study Arabic in Egypt. And alhamdulillah, I won that grant, and I was afforded, basically a free trip to Egypt to study Arabic at their summer institute at the American University in Cairo. So I spent the summer there. And while I was there, I'd say it was about halfway through my summer, we were walking around near Al Azhar University, and all of a sudden the call to prayer went off. And for whatever reason, I was drawn into the masjid. And, everyone was filing in for prayer. And it was almost like I was mesmerized at that point. And of course, having been introduced to Islam many years before and kind of knowing the history and what it takes to become a Muslim, because I'd been researching it for years, the Shahada just sprang from my lips at that point. There was like a warm feeling that came over me, and the recitation of the Quran in particular at this point, for some reason, like I would call it piercing your heart. It pierced my heart, and I couldn't deny it anymore. I had to be a Muslim. That's what I believed, and that's what was in my heart. So, alhamdulillah, that's actually when I took the Shahada. But of course, it took me many years after that of growth to kind of become the solid Muslim I am today. Because again, my friend was a Muslim, but she didn't pray regularly. She didn't, do a lot of the things that you are supposed to be doing every day as a Muslim. So when I came back, I told my mother, and of course, it was another blow. She did cry. I remember her crying when I told her that I was a Muslim now, and this is what I believed, and this is what I was pursuing for my spiritual life. And I mean, alhamdulillah, I've heard worse stories, parents disowning children and not wanting to speak to them. My mom wasn't like that. She was genuinely hurt, I think, and still is to this day, because she feels like I can't get into heaven the way that I'm going about my spiritual life. So we got through it though, alhamdulillah. She accepted it over time, and she knew I'm grown and this is the way that it was going to be, because that's just who I am. Once I believe something, that's it. It really takes a lot to and a lot of facts and science and all of that good stuff to convince me otherwise. So
Yeah, can I just step in there before you move forward again? Can we just go back to Egypt when you accepted Islam? What was your age then?
I must have been 21.
Okay. I just want to concentrate on that period before you converted to Islam, maybe a month or 2 months before. I'm not sure how long you were in Egypt. Can you tell us a bit about your emotions and how you were feeling about Islam during that period?
Sure. So I guess it was always at the forefront of my mind at that time because, like I said, I took a heavy load of Islamic studies classes. So I was immersed in the history. I learned about just the beautiful leadership of Prophet Muhammad, peace be upon him, not only spiritually, but politically, militarily. We did go into the science that happened under Islamic rule and the advances in basically all fields when the Islamic Empire rose, the Ottoman Empire, and all that. And I was just in awe out of all of the uh, societies that I studied and religions that we studied. Islam just kept, it was like I said, that ember had been placed in my brain from when I had read the Quran, and now it was being fueled. You know, everything that I learned was a brick to a building. And in the end, you know, it just kept fanning my curiosity. And I also should mention that, you know, in between this time, there was also 9/11 in the United States, which was a big deal for us. And everything that happened post 9/11 kind of did the opposite of what I feel like the media wanted it to do for us. I mean, there was a lot of course, Islamophobia, and I feel like there was a huge shift in our media. This is when, you know, the word terrorist became synonymous for Muslim, and it was crazy. I just remember reading things and being in disbelief because my best friend and her family were Muslims. I knew a lot of good Muslims. I learned about their society. Like, this was not what Islam was about. And so it kind of, I feel like, enraged me in a way. And this made me drawn to it more because it was the truth. And all of these things being said about it were lies. And so I wanted to be part of the discourse in dispelling those lies because again, Muslims for me weren't just this group. They were my best friend. They were people that I knew and I loved and I cared about, and I knew they were good people. So yeah.
Yeah, that's the same story with me too. I converted in 2002, around the same time, and this was one of the major factors in me converting, was the fact that the way the media portrayed it, and I didn't believe it. My mother was Muslim. I had friends who were Muslim, so I felt the
SubhanAllah.
same way as you.
SubhanAllah. See, I mean, and it brings to mind so many verses, you know, but the basic gist of them are that no matter what people try to do, they can't twist what Allah has put in people's hearts. That's it. So,
Okay, and in that period before you converted, or even years before you converted, had you adopted any Islamic rituals, like in prayer or anything? Maybe you were following your friend in some way.
no. I mean, Christianity and Islam are close. I'm not going to say they're completely alike. And it took me years again to really look at those differences and internalize what they meant. Um, so, you know, I was taught that, of course, you wait for your husband to have sex, and you don't drink, and you don't gamble, and you don't kill, and you don't lie, and, you know, the 10 Commandments, basically. So I had been raised in this. This is how I oriented myself to society and life. So you could say that's Muslim practice too. But specifically, like, you know, participating in iftar or Ramadan or anything like that, no. Because again, you know, they were Muslims, but their practice was not I don't want to say practical. I don't know. It wasn't regular. Let's just say that. They did fast during Ramadan. And I don't know how specifically her parents were with praying, but I know that her and her sister really didn't adhere to a schedule for that either. So,
Okay, and so when you got to Egypt, how long was it before you actually converted?
I think it was about a month into my program. Um, yeah. So my program wasn't really geared towards that, but I feel like I used basically all of my higher education journey to strengthen my spiritual life. So I was just studying Arabic at the university, but of course, Egypt is full of Muslims and mosques and the call to prayer. And so it was, I just believe it was the right environment to push me over the edge, which I had been teetering and looking over for many years.
Okay, and I'm guessing that you probably didn't have much interaction with Muslims before that, before going to Egypt. Can you tell me how that influenced your decision to convert by interacting with these Egyptians and looking at their sincerity and their love for the religion?
Well, again, that's how I started my journey by meeting my best friend and her family. So I believe this is one of the most important tools of dawah we have. Just living your life, being sincere, and being kind to people can make them so curious that you'd be surprised. You may not even know you've met someone you feel like you haven't done much.
Yeah, sorry about that. We actually lost internet connection there. But now Christen continues her story about her experience in Egypt.
Nile cruise to the south, and we had stopped in a village somewhere, maybe by Luxor or Aswan, and we were just wandering. Me and a couple of the students were wandering around the streets, and we got invited in multiple times to people's homes, which were basically a room or two for tea or biscuits or anything. I mean, these people really didn't have much to give, but whatever they did have, you felt like they would give it to you. So this kind of beautiful attitude, which honestly is probably the exact opposite of what we teach in Western society with our, capitalistic and kind of selfish, self-centered attitudes. It just floors you. And of course, this made a huge impression on me. So,
And also, before you converted, this is probably a personal question, but were there any other spiritual experiences that you would like to share with us? Maybe a feeling that God was sending you messages to accept Islam?
um, spiritual. Well, there was a time when I went to the masjid with my best friend, and I got the feeling of God there. Like in church, before, I felt it lacking. I felt it superficial, or I couldn't really connect the way that I felt you should. Um, but when I stepped into the masjid and I witnessed the prayer and the call to prayer, um, I would say there was such peace there that again it was stoking the fire that had been placed inside me. And so there was that. And then there was, and then we went off to McGill together. And during that time, I think I was expecting a lot more from the Islamic Studies program than what it's built for. Uh, I learned a lot of amazing things. I met a lot of amazing people, but I was still searching for spiritual clarity. And um, so when I finished all my coursework in Montreal, I decided, to take some time and figure out what I wanted to do next and all this kind of stuff. Because at this time, I would say my level of practice was 30%. So I would pray sometimes, not regularly. Of course, not all five. Because this wasn't again something that we did in Christianity. Christianity, it's more like when you get the feeling to pray, you pray. It's not like you pray in the morning, you pray at night. There aren't specific times, so that was a new concept for me. Um, and so I wasn't praying regularly. I would fast Ramadan because I feel like I'd still waste time on silly things and I wasn't learning more Quran or listening more or anything like that. So, but the other huge spiritual experience for me that kind of brought me into focus and made me reevaluate my life as a Muslim was when my sister and I had decided we were done with society. You know, we were both sick of it. I think it's probably from our upbringing. Everything seemed fake. All of the shopping and the makeup and the going out and drinking, and it was just never our scene. Um, and we felt lost. You know, at this point, my parents were divorced. Half the time, we didn't know where my father was. My mom was busy because she was a single mother. She had difficult times to, provide for us. And so we were kind of adrift in the world together alone. So we were living, I believe, in Missouri at that point. And I had a pretty decent job. Um, and my sister did too. And we just couldn't find fulfillment in that life. So we decided on a crazy inspiration or a whim or whatever that we were going to hike the Appalachian Trail, which is like a huge trail that spans from Maine to Georgia, I believe, is like the endpoint in the United States. So we wanted to kind of leave society behind and try to figure out, I guess, to reconnect with nature and God and all of that stuff. We decided that's what we needed. So, anyways, we sold basically everything we had. Um, and we headed to Maine. And then when we got to Maine, at the head of the Appalachian Trail, there is this huge mountain called Mount Katahdin. Um, we sold my sister's car at the top of that. And so literally all we had were backpacks and maybe like $800 to $1,200 between us. I don't remember the exact amount, but it wasn't, that much. And it was supposed to last us for the next maybe year on the road. So we get to Maine and we're very excited and we're ready to start uh, our spiritual experience. And in our haste, we pack kind of scantily to climb to the top of Mount Katahdin. We started at about noon, and you should probably start that hike at 8 in the morning. But again, we were so excited and we wanted to get started, and we were young. And when you're young, you feel immortal. So we went with that, and we started at noon. And as we're hiking, it's getting harder and the incline's getting more, and we see people coming down. And, all of this would be in retrospect, would be like, aha, well, maybe we shouldn't be continuing. But we continued. We eventually reached summit, and it was beautiful and wonderful and lovely. And then the sun started to go down. And we were like, okay, we have to get down the mountain because we can't spend a night out here. We don't have any heavy clothes. Clouds were starting to roll in, and we just didn't have the supplies that we needed to be safe on a mountain because, of course, it was lovely. It was like June, so I'd say it was 70, 75 degrees while we were hiking up. But as the sun started to go down, the temperature started to drop significantly. And so we were racing down the mountain, and all of a sudden we got stuck because dark fell. It was like that curtain of night that comes down, and we were on a mountain. So there's no light, there's no like ambient light from from houses or cities or anything. It's just pitch black. You can't see 2 inches in front of you. So finally we get stopped and we come to the realization that we are going to spend the night on this mountain or halfway down or whatever it was. We didn't know where we were at that point, or how close we were to the base. So we hunker down against a tree and we are talking, we're trying to keep ourselves awake. Of course, at that point, we're very tired because we had been hiking for maybe like 8 hours. We didn't bring food. We had very little water. And then we heard thunder and lightning. And I just remember being in disbelief because we were already cold. So, and like I said, the temperature had dropped super quickly. I'm not going to guess what it was, but we were shivering already. And then it started to rain. And I've been an outdoorsy person. My sister has too. We've hiked all our lives. And we've heard plenty of stories of how hypothermia goes. So we were sitting and huddling, and we were trying to use our jackets to make a tent so that we weren't going to get too wet, which of course did not turn out that well. And the storm just intensified. There was rain, there was wind, there was lightning. We heard things crashing in the forest. It was pretty scary. And I remember thinking, my God, this was the dumbest thing we've ever done. And so maybe 2 hours into the storm, we got really cold, or I got really cold. I told my sister, I don't feel well. I was shaking uncontrollably. My teeth were chattering. Like the sound was like that you see in the cartoons. And then all of a sudden I had to relieve me. And then I got really, really cold. And about an hour later, we're shivering and we're trying to keep warm and we're huddling. I got really, really warm. There was my sister started singing like this Christian hymn, and the wind was so loud and the rain was so loud and the lightning and the thunder. And I just remember this warm feeling coming over me. And at that moment, I knew that's not good because in the last stages of hypothermia, this is what will happen to you. Your body will go into a survival mode. So you're freezing, but your body will make you think you're warm, and then you drift off into sleep, and then you never wake up. It's a survival response. So anyway, I got really warm. My sister was singing this hymn, and I felt the presence of God there. And at that point, I was falling asleep on myself, and I felt that presence, and like, no, this isn't where I'm meant to die. This isn't the end. There's something more that I need to do. So I got this burst of energy, and my sister and I decided we have to do exercise. We have to do jumping jacks, run in place, whatever we have to do to warm our bodies up, because we can't die here. So we both jump up, and we probably look like crazy people. We were running in place and doing all that good stuff for what seemed like hours, just forever. And we were so tired and so downtrodden, and all of a sudden dawn broke and the sun started coming up, and we could see in front of ourselves. And subhanAllah, unbeknownst to us, we were like 2 feet from a cliff. Not like a huge cliff, but if we had fallen, one of us would have definitely broken our leg or an arm or head or whatever. So we finally can see, and we begin descending like crazy. Just the amount of adrenaline that came into our bodies was insane, and we just ran the rest of the way down the mountain, made it to the base camp. I remember drinking a ton of water and then just falling to sleep after we got into dry clothes. So that was a huge wake up call for me, that the line between life and death is so thin, and I better figure out what it is I need to do to be okay when death does eventually come for me.
And so how did this affect your practice of Islam after that?
So after that, we didn't last too much longer on that hike. I'm sorry to say, it would have been uh, an epic adventure, I'm sure. We lasted about 2 more weeks, and then I got a pinched nerve in my foot, and it just made it impossible for us to go on. We had 70 or 80-pound packs on, so we got off the trail. And God put many people in our path to kind of get us back into society. But at that point, I had no money, no job, and I had to figure out how I was going to survive as a person does in society. Even though, like I've said, money hasn't been my driving force at that point, you needed money to live. So I applied for an ESL job in South Korea, and I got it, alhamdulillah. And I took a flight to South Korea and I started to teach English there. I think it was my way of trying to stay disconnected. So I wanted to go somewhere where I could just be by myself and discover what it was that I needed to do to live a happy life, to live a God fearing life. And around the same time, maybe it was 2 or 3 months into my teaching, no, longer than that. So it was 6 months, I want to say. But I got to South Korea and I basically banished everything superfluous from my life. So I didn't go shopping. I didn't want to engage in the stupid societal activities that I had been doing before. Um, I wanted to disconnect and understand and kind of rebuild who I was, or find who I was. So 6 months into teaching, Ramadan came around again. I had been reading the Quran before, and then I decided, okay, this Ramadan, I'm going to do it. I'm going to pray my 5 prayers. I'm going to watch Islamic lectures. I'm going to reread the Quran. I'm going to memorize surahs. Like, I had all of these huge goals for my Ramadan because, again, I was by myself and I was trying to distance myself from time wasting activities. And I had never really tackled Ramadan on the spiritual side. Before that, I was, fasting. I was just not eating and drinking, which is, I don't know, 1/100th of what Ramadan is for, in my opinion. So in the middle of this, and in the middle of South Korea, I came upon the verse where it calls for Muslim women to wear hijab or cover. And so, I believe it was Allah. He put it in my head to question myself on why I wasn't dressing more modestly or wearing hijab or these things. And I think a lot of the reason was fear on my part, that this automatically, when you wear hijab, it makes you an ambassador of Islam. And like I said, I wasn't praying. I didn't feel like I was the spiritual beacon that I should have been. So to put on hijab and not be perfect in my practice, I felt like was kind of a farce, or, a misrepresentation maybe.
And how many years was that after you converted?
So this is in 2008. Yes, 2008. So that was 5 years after I converted. I mean, hijab was never a thing on my mind when I first converted, to be honest with you. Because again, my friend didn't wear it, her family didn't wear it, and it's really not the norm in the Pakistan. I don't want to like generalize, but in the Pakistani community where I was exposed, you know, they would put hijab on to pray, and that's it. So that aspect had never been in my mind when I had first converted.
Okay, and just quickly now, to interrupt in your story, would you have any advice to anyone, you know, who's thinking about Islam and they're hesitating about this hijab issue? What advice would you give them?
Well, I would tell them to look at the question in positive terms. So before, I would always ask myself, why should I do something? Which can kind of prep your mind for a negative answer or to find like a conclusion against what you're asking. But instead, ask yourself, why am I not? Why aren't I wearing hijab? What's my reason? Um, and so I kind of prepped myself in that way, and I couldn't find a good reason, to be honest with you. I and this is what ultimately made me decide that. And after reading the hadith and of course going through what scholars had to say on the matter, it appeared to me, and it still appears to me, that at the very least it's a sunnah. Okay. um, as far as obligatory, you know, at this point in my journey, I can't say 100% that I believe it's obligatory, but I do believe as a Muslim woman, you must be modest. And whatever that looks like for you, it might be different. Um, and I think that's the beauty of Islam. You know, there's room for growth, and as your spiritual life evolves, so too does your physical life sometimes. So when I'm convinced of something, that's it. I do it. I apply it. I became convinced that I should be wearing hijab. Um, there was no reason for me to delay anymore. And so I did. I put it on, and I remember walking out of my apartment the first day in South Korea. Now I'm a tall person already, so I had already stood out pretty starkly in the Asian population. But now I had a scarf on my head too, so I mean, I felt like basically a spotlight was on me that first day walking back to my job. It was, yeah, I'll never forget it. But alhamdulillah, I just had peace in my heart when I did it, and ever since. So it hasn't really even been a thought in my mind anymore. It's just, this is what it is, and that's what I'm doing. Yes, there's so much to the story. I think like everybody else's story. But after I put on my hijab, you know, my English teaching company was not happy that I did this, because I think a lot of companies in Asia want you to look a certain way if you're going to teach English for them. And they had expressed that some of the parents were not comfortable with me wearing hijab around the children. And so I had had a talk with my boss, and she asked me if I would be willing to take it off at work. And I said no. And, you know, they thought it was just because, again, I don't think Islam is very prevalent there. And the whole time I was there, I found one masjid. So for them, it was like a new thing, and they didn't really understand. And she thought I was just going to wear it for Ramadan and then be done with it and take it off. Well, when I didn't take it off, she called me into her office, and she was like, so I thought Ramadan was over. When is this going to come off? And I, you know, I explained to her nicely that it wasn't ever going to come off. And she said, well, you know, we hired you looking one way, and now you've changed. This might affect your future employment here. So I had a decision to make. I could either, you know, follow Allah in my heart, or I could compromise which I've never been good at, and take off my hijab to save my job. Well, clearly, I kept my hijab on, and I wasn't fired yet, but the line of talk was, until we find someone else to replace you, you can kind of do your job. So that kind of ended my ESL career in South Korea. And subhanAllah, it was like a week before I was scheduled to come home for my sister's wedding anyways. So I saw this as a transition. This has happened many times in my life, where if I go with what Allah is leading me to, then I'm always rewarded with something better. And alhamdulillah, I was, because I had been talking to who now is my husband of 12 years on a Muslim matrimonial site. And we had decided when I come back for my sister's wedding that we would meet. And subhanAllah, after the wedding, I came to New Orleans to meet him. I was not expecting much at this point, because my experience was most people were fantastic on paper, and then they turned out to be somebody else. So this was what I was expecting, quite honestly. And when I met him, it was just indescribable. And I talk a lot, so that's saying something. So we talked for about 3 days in person and got married. That was it. I just knew, and he just knew. And alhamdulillah, we've been married for 12 years. I have 4 beautiful kids, and I really feel like he has been put in my life for so many reasons, but primarily he has helped me strengthen my faith and has been my rock in the world. So the overarching themes in my journey from Christianity to Islam, a huge theme has been me letting go of what I think is the best for me, and really sincerely praying to Allah for what is the best for me. Because as human beings, we're so fallible, we're so fickle, and so limited in our view, that sometimes we want things that would be terrible for us, and sometimes we don't want things that would be very beneficial for us. So for instance, I have this I would call it like a superstition, but subhanAllah, it's come true in my life so many times. Every time I say never, that scenario exactly is what Allah is going to put in my way, almost as like an affirmation that what you think is not going to happen or will never happen can absolutely happen with Allah. So, for instance, I said I would never live in the South, and here I am living in New Orleans. I said I would never marry someone who was previously divorced. Alhamdulillah, my husband, I can't imagine being married to someone else. And he had been married twice before he married me. I said I would never have 4 kids after watching my mom struggle with having 4 kids. Alhamdulillah, I have 4 kids. The list goes on for me. So we're told, to put our faith completely in Allah. And a lot of the times that may seem scary and like the opposite of what you feel like doing. But if you do it, inshallah, you will be rewarded 10 to 100 times what you ever thought you could get. So there's that. And I would encourage all of the listeners to listen to your gut. You have something within you. And the Quran speaks about it, and we know about it from Hadith, that Allah has built us with this nature inside to seek Him. There's a reason why, especially in times of crisis, you are looking for a higher power. And that is because it is literally in your DNA. And in my experience, you can fight your nature for so long and it gets tiring and you're not happy and you're confused and you can get depressed and all of these bad things that we have happen in modern society because we are fighting our own nature. We're saying things like having a boyfriend or girlfriend is okay, and wearing what we want is okay, and listening to what we want, and filling our minds with all this garbage is okay. It's not going to really affect us, but it does, and it wears away at your nature every single day. So don't fight that nature and don't bury that nature. You can drink as much as you want, you can shop as much as you want, but in the end, it will be there waiting for you while you're, let's say, stuck in quarantine by yourself, and you're going to have to face it eventually. And if you don't, I've known many people in my life who have actively fought that nature and have died in a state where they're not at peace. And I think this is probably one of the worst things that can happen to you in life, is you die before you realize what you were meant to do or who you were meant to worship or why you were created. So I would say live your life in a way that you're always striving for better understanding of yourself and the world around you and why you were created. I would encourage listeners to do their own research. Don't just take anyone's word for it. I don't care who they are or what credentials they have. And believe in what you have read and understood and ask the questions, because we have them in Islam. That's like one of the most beautiful parts about it. Whenever I've had a doubt or a question, or something has seemed like it's not fitting with the justice and the equality that I found in the Quran, then I can find my answer. And alhamdulillah, I've always found an answer in either the Hadith or the Quran or with a scholar. And we have so many resources today. It's just insane not to be able to do that. Google it, go to your local masjid, go to YouTube, listen to a podcast. We just have so many methods of, read a book. I know that's old school, but sit down and read the Quran. It has so much wisdom. And one thing I do want to point out for the people coming from a Judeo-Christian background, there are a lot of people who will tell you that there are so many similarities between, Judaism, Christianity, and Islam. And while this may be true, you do need to keep in mind, and I would like you to read the differences, because subhanAllah, it blows your mind how different the Quran is written from something like the Bible. And the greatest example and the kind of aha moment I had for it was just looking at our creation story, for example. In the Bible, it's a human tale. I mean, if you've read literature, it reads like somebody has written it, like a person, because there's blame and there's guilt and there's punishment, there's retribution, it's so human, it's insane to me. And also it creates this whole line of misogyny, because Adam is created first, then Eve is made from his rib. Okay, so apparently Eve from this is lesser. And then it is Eve who is tempted by a serpent, by the way. Satan is never mentioned in Genesis, and this is something later that scholars will say, oh, the snake was actually Satan in disguise, and they come up with all of their theories. But anyways, it's a snake that tempts Eve into eating the forbidden fruit. Okay, then she gets Adam to eat it, and then when God comes and asks Adam, why have you eaten this? He blames his wife. He blames Eve. And so this sets up so many terrible ideologies in society, in my opinion. And the idea of original sin, that we're born sinners and that the only way that God could accept us back into his fold is to send himself, but his only son also, because of the Trinity thing that they have going on, in order for him to forgive us. Like, the whole thing just sets up so many terrible psychological, what do I want to say? Like, it sets up society for a terrible psychological framework to operate in. And so, yeah. So if you're coming from a Christian background, please understand what the differences are. It's beautiful to say that, you know, the Jews and the Christians are people of the book. And, you know, my own family is Christian, and I don't love them any less for it. But understand what becoming a Muslim does for you. It sets you free from all this ideology that men and women, that somehow men are more spiritually pure than women, or that you were born sinning, or that your nature is sinful. It's not. It's the opposite in Islam. We're born pure. And the only way that we become sinful is through our environment and through Satan, of course. So I think this is a huge difference that oftentimes is overlooked and is very powerful. My advice succinctly, I'm not very good at succinct, but you know, like I've been saying, you have a nature. I wouldn't fight it. I've seen people lose that fight way too many times, and they've been miserable along the way. And I believe this leads to our high rates of depression and anxiety in the world we have today. If you're looking for a source of peace and inspiration and a way to guide your life, just turn to the Quran, turn to the Hadith, turn to the Sunnah. Something difficult in your life, just make a sincere dua to Allah to guide you for what is best, regardless of the outcome, regardless of what you want. And if you follow it, inshallah, you will always come out on top. There's no way with Allah on your side that anybody or anything in this world will be denied you. That's it. Allah will put people in your path. Allah will put opportunities in your path because of your sincere intention. And I believe that's also a huge thing. Your intention is a huge thing behind whatever you do, because you could be doing all this wonderful charity work and even dawah, but if you're doing it with your ego in mind, which this is very hard for many people, it's like a human condition to have an ego, then what you're doing becomes less meaningful, in my opinion. So always clear your intentions and trust the law.
Okay, Christen, thank you so much for all your advice and also sharing your wonderful story with us.
You're welcome. Thank you for having me.
Yeah, you're very welcome. So, yeah, all the best for you. And truly, you know, your story is inspiring, and I hope it has inspired our listeners out there. So I'll have to wrap it up there, and I'll just say peace be upon you, and also to all our listeners, and have a good Ramadan coming up in a few days.
Inshallah.